Welcome to Bonnie Carolee Makes Cards. Today's cards feature Simon Says Stamps all Snowflake background. This is my first time making a spinner card, a fun and easy interactive element. So let's get started. I began by stamping the background on Neenah Solar White 110-pound cardstock. The cardstock was sized 5.5 inches by 5.5 inches, which I would later cut down. I would be trimming this down to a panel that was 4 inches by 5.25 inches and wanted some flexibility in case I had any stamping imperfections. 2 of the panels were stamped with Simon Says Stamps dye inks. I used soft navy on one and teal on the other. I had to stamp twice to get a solid background for the snowflakes. Thank goodness for stamping platforms. The third background was stamped with Distress Oxide inks. I used spun sugar, picked raspberry, and wilted violet. Creating the gradient took a little bit more work than the one-color backgrounds. I stamped several times, each time extending one color into the next, just like ink blending. When I was happy with the depth of the tone for each color, I worked on the transition. To avoid an obvious line, I feathered the ink pad on the stamp between the two colors. Although it is hard to see, I used a flicking motion much like you would use if you were Copic coloring, instead of pouncing the pad up and down. This ink application technique helped to achieve that blended look. Next, I stamped the spinning elements on Bristol Smooth cardstock using Simon Says Stamps Intense Black ink. The snowman and the penguin are from Simon Says Stamps Snow Much stamp set. I would need a front and a back for each of the images. For the snowman, I masked off the face, the mittens, and the tail end of the scarves with just a little bit of tape. After the stamp is inked up, the tape is removed. When I stamp, I'm left with a little bit of a broken line in the scarf, which I fix up with a waterproof fine black pen. To create the backside for the penguin, I simply trace it after I have fussy cut the image. The skater is a die that was included in Simon Says Stamps Snow Much card kit. She was die cut twice. When die cutting, I find that oftentimes there is a slightly dimensional raised area around the outline of the image. I flattened out one of the die cut images by running it back and forth in my die cutting machine. To color the back of the penguin, I used a black Sharpie pen. It doesn't get any easier than that. The hand cutting for both the back and the front of the penguin was not exact. I disguised the imperfections by edging both of the images and coloring in a thin line on the underside with a black Sharpie pen. The images were colored with zig markers. I didn't worry very much about detail. I simply put the color down, pulled it out with my water brush to provide some highlighting here and there. For those areas that would remain white, I put in some shadows with a soft gray. A Versamark pen was used to ink up areas that I wanted to apply some puffy embossing powder to. I used it on some trim for both the skater and the snowman. The snowflake panel was die cut with the largest die from My Favorite Things stitched rectangle stacks 2. Next, I worked on the openings for the spinning elements. I chose a die from Hero Art's Infinity Ovals that would allow the elements to spin unimpeded. The panel is placed on the card base, leaving a 1/8 inch border. The oval die is centered and taped in place. When I run this through my die cutting machine, the snow panel is die cut and an impression is left on the card base. When I die cut the card base, I know that it will be perfectly aligned with the snowflake panel. After the card base is creased, the cutout is adhered through the oval window on the inside of the card. The front panel is yet to be attached and is only there to ensure that the cutout is correctly oriented. To prepare the spinning elements, Sook Wang double-sided tape is placed down the middle of one of the sides. This strong adhesive will hold a length of clear nylon thread in place. The addition of glue will hold the front and back together, with the thread securely sandwiched in between. The spinning element is centered in the middle of the oval. The nylon thread is held in place at the top and the bottom of the card with Sook Wang tape. Before the backing is removed, I burnish it well with my bone folder to ensure that it is very secure. White glue is used to adhere the snowflake panel to the card base. I resist the temptation to try out the spinning element until it is completely dry. For the sentiments, I use some dies from Simon Says Stamp, Joy, Merry Christmas, and Hope. I die cut both white cardstock and white sheet foam. I don't pop the sentiments away from the backing. For the ones that are on the white cardstock, I apply Cosmic Shimmer Gilded Avocado Opal Blaze Polish. That's a mouthful, but it is a beautiful shimmery finish. I let it dry completely. I use a craft pick to release the sentiments from the cardstock. Working with the die cuts that are on the sheet foam, I remove the centers. Glue is dotted on the sentiment while it is still encased in the sheet foam. The cardstock sentiment is placed on top. The centers that were removed from the foam die cut help act as registration guides for aligning the sentiment. This works very well for adding dimension to those fine sentiments that are difficult to stack. The sentiments were attached, crossing over a portion of the oval opening. I was careful to make sure that they did not interfere with the spinning of the element. Both the Hope and Joy sentiments were accompanied by shadow dies. These were cut out of vellum. The foam back sentiment was attached to the shadow die cut and then adhered to the card. With the sentiments in place, there are just a few embellishments to finish up these cards. Something that I should have mentioned during the coloring portion of the video was that the skater's dress was stenciled using the same Opal Blaze polish that was used on the sentiments. For the tiny eyes on both the skater and the snowman, black Nuvo drops were applied with a pin. After the penguin's eyes were done, Nuvo glitter drops white blizzard was used to accent the snowflakes. The drops dry clear, providing some nice shiny highlights across the panel. And that wraps up this set of 3 spinner cards featuring Simon Says Stamp's all snowflake background. As always, I appreciate your visit.